Ready then. Cloud Foundry Foundation Technical Oversight Committee for the 10th of January 2023. Agenda today, we're going to hear from the CF on K8s working group, review some PRs, any other business. Is the CF, are we calling this the Korifi working group now, or is officially the name still CF on K8s?
I think we decided to keep the name as CF on K8s just to keep it more generic and decoupled from the specific individual project, although we're doing 100% that at the moment.
Fair enough. All right. Floor is yours then.
Okay. Let's see if I can manage to share screen. First of all, I should be presenting this thing, I guess. Okay. Boom. Boom. Can you see it? Can you see the presentation? Yep. Okay. Yep. It's not a big presentation, but still. Just to reiterate, I am Giuseppe. I am one of the leads for the CF on K8s working group. The working group is dedicated to all things Cloud Foundry on Kubernetes. But at the moment, 100% of our time goes into this project called Korifi, which is a re-implementation of the Cloud Foundry API on top of Kubernetes native technologies. So custom resource definitions, controllers, webhooks, stuff like that. I think last time we had this update, I had told you that we were very near to a 0.4 release. And yeah, that came out in October. The main thing for that release was we released a Helm chart. So now that's how we distribute Korifi. Instead of just a bunch of YAML files, you can now install it as a chart, which makes it a lot easier and also makes our life easier when we want to introduce possible customizations and configurations, as templates are quite useful. We've also moved all the Korifi control plane containers, so all the things that implement the Korifi API and all the controllers all into one namespace, so that it's, I guess, they're easier to manage as opposed previously each one had their own namespace and that didn't feel like necessary. What else? Some work on logging in general to make it more consistent and more useful. And then we keep extending our support of API endpoints that we don't implement yet. So this time around, we implemented the domains API. So you can now create, delete, get domains via the official CF API. Previously, you had to resort to just doing it via the Kubernetes one. We've also had another release 3 weeks ago, and that was 0.5. And the main focus of that release was to work with AWS, because it turns out that authenticating to Amazon container registries, the Elastic Container Registry, is not as straightforward as authenticating to other sort of registries, because Amazon will only issue credentials that are short-lived. And if you want to authenticate against one of the registries in a way that doesn't expire in a few hours, you have to use their IAM system and use service accounts which map to users and profiles on Amazon's IAM. And Korifi just wasn't equipped to use service accounts instead of just plain credentials to push to registries. So yeah, now we are. So from 0.5, you can install on EKS, and we have a specific installation guide for AWS and EKS. As part of this, we've changed the way we create container repositories when you push apps. Because previously what happened is we would push a new container repository every time we needed to push a container. Like every time we built an app or every time we pushed an app's sources, we just generated a guid, and you would find this guid as the name of a repository on your registry you've configured. And this made it, first of all, impossible to tell which container repositories belong to which app. But it also meant there was kind of a proliferation of repositories, because every push resulted in potentially a couple of repositories. Now what we do is we push all the source packages for the same app to one repository, all the built images for the same app to one repository. So we will have exactly 2 container repositories per app, which I think makes sense, because then you can kind of track the history of your app's builds, for example, and same for sources in case you want to do rollbacks and stuff like that. And it just makes a lot more sense. And they're named after the app's guid. So if you know the app guid, you can just go and find the repositories. Yeah, that's it. And this is the first release that has a couple of contributions from people outside of the core team. So that's also very exciting. People are taking a look at the repository and just looking for maybe, good first issues and just contributing or fixing typos, stuff like that. But it's a start. It's pretty exciting. Yeah, so that's what's been happening. In terms of future plans, team is already at work on release 06. And the 2 main things in this release are, first, I just told you that we put all the control plane containers into one namespace. Now we're going further and we are putting pretty much all the control plane logic into just 2 containers, because previously what we considered to be optional components, which are components that can be replaced as long as with something implementing kind of the same contract, they were their own containers. And that meant Korifi was running in something like 5 or 6 containers. Then we realized that this kind of optional behavior it's easier and better to just have this optional behavior to be triggered via config flags and just condensate everything, all the controllers into one container, because they almost never need to scale separately. So it's just easier to operate with just fewer containers. So from 06, we'll just ship a container for the API and a container for all the controllers and webhooks and stuff. We still keep 2 because we think that there is a potentially interest in scaling things separately when it comes to API versus controllers. You might want to have more instances of the API maybe, because the API is stateless, so you can be scaled easily. Controllers cannot. So that's the idea. And second, I talked about kind of replaceable components, optional components. We're making the networking component, which is the one reconciling CF routes and CF domains, etc., also an optional component, so that vendors can introduce their own networking stack if they want. So everything that is now coupled, at the moment we only support Contour, and the idea was, okay, let's wait for the Gateway API to be mature enough that we can just rely on the Gateway API, and then people will be able to provide their own networking stack as long as it implements the Gateway API. The problem is the Gateway API isn't ready yet. It doesn't have all the features that we need, etc. So we decided, okay, we already have a boundary inside of Korifi that it kind of is well suited for this kind of thing. So we decided to do that for now. And then I guess at some point, once the Gateway API is mature and everybody's using it and it's stable, we might decide, okay, there's no need for this thing anymore. But for now, if you want to replace Contour with something else, you can just re-implement our own interface and do it. I think I think there's already been some experiments with Istio, for example, and it should be possible to do it with any one of the available options. So once we have those 2 things in, I think it might be worth releasing again, because why not? And then we might go back to other things we had planned. So for example, Docker support, I have drafted a proposal for it long time ago, put it down because a lot of other things came up that seem to be more priority. So I might pick that one up again because we don't support CF push with Docker images still. We don't support multi-app manifests at the moment, so that might be nice, and it should be relatively easy to do. Our support for annotations and labels is still partial, so we want to once and for all make sure that all resources can be labeled and annotated. And then another thing we had in mind was to spend one release just getting rid of as many bugs as we can from the backlog, because we've been accumulating lots of these like kind of little annoying things that we've been postponing for quite a while. So it might be worth like spending some time just squashing a whole bunch of bugs and then having like a bug fix release with kind of some more stability. So these are the big things we have in mind at the moment. And that's really it. That's the end of my 2 slides presentation. If anyone has questions, as usual, I'm happy to answer.
Sure. Thank you very much. Do you have a sense of when we might expect 0.6?
The replaceable networking work, for example, is already it's already progressing well, and I think the 2 containers thing is probably already done. I think either the PR was merged today or is going to be merged by the end of the week. So I expect it. Honestly, it's probably going to happen in January because if we want those two things have quite an impact, but they're not necessarily very complex to implement. So we still want to release because it's kind of a good. It feels like a good, milestone, but it's not necessarily lots of scope. So yeah, it might happen this month.
Okay. Have you had any further discussions around the CF marketplace and services and whatnot? Because I think there's the people I've talked to that if they were ever going to try Korifi, like they're waiting for that at this point.
Yeah, it's not something I think we have explored deeply, just because we thought there were like more pressing things to do first. But now that we are kind of happy with the level of coverage of the API, it might be time to revisit that and just have an explore, maybe just start taking a look. I think the last time we checked, there was this doubt about, okay, which spec would be the best suited for us? Like there is the SBAPI, then there is like some, I think, Kubernetes specific spec for bindings, but is that enough? And I don't know, I just haven't done enough research, but it might be interesting to start researching. But like that's the stage we are at, which is like we don't even know which spec to implement. So if it happens, it's going to happen it's going to take a while.
Yeah, that makes sense. Any more? No. Is there anything you need from us?
Nope, I don't think so.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time. Let us move on to review some PRs then. I've put 2 on there as always. If there's any others you want to discuss, just throw them in there as we go through. I think they should be reasonably quick. I think they just need a once over, and then we can merge them. 502 then. We have 3 approvals, but before I press the button, any final objections? Speak now or forever hold your peace. No. Button pressed. Okay, it's 502, 497, much the same. One last chance. Go once, twice, Sold to the lowest bidder. That is PR's done, unless anybody else has any others they want to address. Nope. Okay. Any other business then?
I'll touch on issue 483. Ruben, that's your ask about LFX Project Control Center. So we had a breakthrough there. I think I've been kind of the roadblock I've been struggling with for some months there. Finally got legal to restructure all those sub-projects to correlate with the working groups. So now I can go and I'm chatting with the Insights folks today with Insights and security, and set up dashboards for each individual working group. So that should all happen quite soon now. The big blocker there is kind of solved for. So yeah, I'll maybe next week or the week after I'll share updates on that.
Good to know. Thank you very much.
Thanks. We had an
yeah, go forward.
okay, yeah. There was, I think, an agenda item to discuss the fate of Concourse, or like if we are open to moving Concourse into the CF Foundation. I think that was on the agenda somewhere, right?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, if we've I had intended to bring that one up next week when we're all back, but if folks want to talk about it today,
sorry.
we absolutely should. I didn't tell anyone that's what I was doing, so that's on me. But yeah, if you have news on that, then yeah, go ahead, share.
I mean, no news except for that. I think it would be useful for us to make up our mind before we start to do any like legal work on the VMware side, because that's more expensive, right? If the foundation is not open to it, it doesn't make sense to do the other work.
Yeah.
So that's still there. And on the so I did have a follow-up call. So I think I reported on the call I had with Chip, right? Did I? Yeah. So I did have a follow-up call with one of the Salsa authors, Salsa dev authors, about the to go more in depth into the situation that we have here in the foundation, and I got a totally different answer. So now that person is gonna go back to Chip, and then they're gonna figure out what the best path forward is, because I mean the Salsa person said it would be a good idea to adopt Salsa in the foundation, and Chip said something different. So I mean we're gonna see where that lands, and that all is gonna influence whether I don't know. It is at least, if we want to adopt Salsa, it makes more sense to move Concourse here because we need like certain features in Concourse to be able to do it properly. So yeah. Has SAP made up their mind about their stance on the matter?
Honestly, we didn't have any discussions since then inside SAP. But yeah, we can have the discussion and then let's see.
Yeah,
I can trigger the discussion inside SAP.
okay, that's good. Andy has yeah, just for completeness sake, Andy, do you have anything that the UK government has discussed about it, or has it not been discussed? Opinion.
Yeah, it's a difficult one because we look like a monolith, but we're like absolutely not. Just because of the position that we're in at the moment, no, we're not discussing it as a platform. There may be other parts of government talking about this, so I will go and see if there's an element in the government at the moment looking at whole government cloud strategy and development practices and whatnot. So I will go and speak to friends over there and see if they are talking about this, because I suspect that might be a useful thing to know about. See what they're thinking. Yeah.
Thanks.
We had a discussion with Ruben last week about Concourse instances for the different working groups and the areas inside the working groups. So we have different areas in our working group, and we tend to say that every area should set up its own Concourse instance for their automation. For example, UA and Bosch, they're completely different teams, so to say. And we have at the moment CredHub where we put our secrets, and we with CredHub we cannot separate properly the secrets which are for Bosch and which UA have, and we feel like having their own Concourse instance is the better approach.
I think basically the request is, can we have a separate Google account for the UAA team, so that is like a per area Google account? Is that like the pattern we want to use, or do we want to use like a per working group Concourse? And if we want to use a per working group Concourse, then we need to re-architect how Concourse is deployed currently with Kubernetes, because it's not that multi-tenant. As in, secrets used by one area will be accessible by the other area, and that poses security risks, especially around publishing stem cells and stuff. We don't want too many people to have access to those things. So ideally, we just have a Google project per area. And I think that also is nice from a costing, like from a, I don't know, seeing the costs per area. I think it's better than having it all in one bucket.
From the other areas in CF deployment, there's no such problem, because basically there's just one area that makes it easy. For application runtime interfaces, we will go the path to share the Concourse. That means at least Autoscaler and Kapi. At least there's no real reason. I mean, yes, it's not fully separated. There's no multi-tenancy, that's true. On the other hand, there's also a close cooperation within the working group, and you would also not have one Concourse by developer. So what is the right granularity? Maybe it's a sign also that the working group is maybe too big or something like that. I don't know. And I don't want to say, I mean, maybe it's let it free. Every working group can decide on its own. Of course, maybe it's as easy as that, but otherwise you have the effort, right? You have to maintain it. Of course, it's higher cost. Concourse has several resources just standing around. I don't know. I think for Kapi, we would start with this shared approach first. Maybe even share dev environments or tools like it was done before at VMware. Because, for instance, the CF Java client will probably need something to run their tests against a standard dev foundation, and in Kapi there's the same reason. Why not share a pool of these dev landscapes if it's just short-lived usage? But it's just ideas. It's not yet set up. The Autoscaler team has set up the Concourse in a really nice setup, with this based on the Bosch installation, but with quite some improvements. And now we, for the cloud controller, want as a first step bring the performance tests on it just to gain a little bit experience how it feels like with a separate team and so far. That's the approach in this other working group.
I mean, like we can also say we find the risk acceptable, and then we can share these the concourse instance, but then we probably will want to rename it instead of like bosh.ci.
Yeah,
it should probably be FI, like foundational infrastructure or something. .ci. .cloudfoundry.org.
yes, that's how it's set up in the other two working groups. I know where this concourse setup is used. So application runtime deployments and interfaces. It's named like the working group and set up in such a way.
Yeah, in our use case, sharing dev environments won't be so reasonable, I think, because Bosch and UA.
Yeah,
different teams.
That's true. Yeah, it's maybe also working group specific. How a good setup looks like. That's true.
Yeah, these teams are not interacting much, so that's one of the main issues, I guess.
How big a deal is, or how much of a change, how much work is it to give people a default single concourse for the working group and then allow them to change that later? So I allow them like to start down that path, and then when they learn what works better for them.
So on the foundation infrastructure, we have one for Bosch, and now we have a second area that wants to start doing things, and now this becomes a problem. Or like I think the Bosch one was the first, so we didn't consider naming and scoping when that was set up. So yeah, I think it's a bit too late or we did that approach basically, and that's why we have this discussion now.
I think I understand. I feel like maybe I'm not close enough to these projects to know the nuances here. Is this a decision that the TOC needs to make? Is it something that the working groups could only decide for themselves?
It is a bit of a like resource like Chris needs to create in the end a Google account, right? And if we decide that every area can have its own Google account, then the area can just do it. It's about that. Like, do we want a Google account per working group or per area?
I mean, application runtime deployments has already multiple YAS accounts, but it's one Google, one AWS account because of the different infrastructures on which we test. It's not for separation. So in theory, this multiple YAS accounts thingy already exists. But yeah, somebody has to take care for it, and you need to maintain it, and so there's also a certain work involved.
This does feel sort of to me like something that the working groups maybe would want to chip in on. Like, do they want one per area with the trade-off of having to manage that, but having more flexibility as a result?
Sure. So there's no objection from the TOC. That's what I'm getting here, right? So then Beyhan and I will just make a decision and then work with Chris to get an account, probably, because we had this discussion. So okay, thanks.
Yeah, send an objection from me.
No.
Okay. Any other business? No. Okay. Well, we'll wrap up there. A nice, reasonably short one for the first one of the year. Possibly next week will be a bit longer, or I'll stick the concourse stuff on the agenda. I actually didn't want to do it this week, first week back, when people maybe hadn't had a chance to think about it during the first week.
I have something to discuss after we
Sure.
stop recording.
Sure thing.
So if we can close then.
Yeah, let's wrap up today. Thank you very much, folks.